This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Chevy Lynn Vasky with the K-State Radio Network. We start our week with part of a Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode as K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts and fisheries and aquatic extension specialist Joe Gerken discuss managing ponds. K-State Forage specialist Kelsey Nordyke continues the show as she details agriculture science projects to check out at this year's state fair. Tuesday's show ends with Mike Brouk, K-State dairy specialist, who mentions forage season coming to a close and encourages producers to determine how much forage they'll need moving forward. That and more is coming up ahead on this episode of Agriculture Today. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we continue Tuesday's show with part of a Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode with hosts Joe Gerken and Drew Ricketts as they discuss vegetation and pond management.
People ask about fertilizing their pond, and so that's something we've talked about previously, but it's very common when you build a new pond in the South that you fertilize it, and that causes planktonic algae to really go crazy. In our neck of the woods in the Great Plains, if you add fertilizer to a pond, you're very likely going to cause a lot more problems long term than you will by boosting or jump starting that initial phase. So a new pond, it just needs a little bit of time in our area to get the nutrients it needs to be, successful long term.
Oh, that makes sense. So how do we end up with too much algae in a pond, or not just algae, too much vegetation in a pond?
Yeah, the two big things there are sunlight and nutrients. If you start to see a lot of vegetation in the middle of your pond, probably a good indication that you don't have a deep enough pond. And floating vegetation, the duckweed and the watermeal is the exception to that. It grows on the surface, so It doesn't need to, it doesn't necessarily mean that your pond isn't very deep. But if you start to see that you have plants growing a third or a halfway out in your pond, that's probably an indication that the slope around the edge of your pond might be getting a little bit too shallow. And so maybe we need to start thinking about what can we do to get that sunlight knocked down to where we have that 3-to-1 slope. We're getting out into deeper habitat faster where the sunlight isn't hitting the bottom and these plants can't grow. Almost every aquatic plant, including the algae mats that float on top, actually grow on the bottom of the pond. And so these plants that grow on the bottom, they need that sunlight to hit the bottom. So if we can stop the sunlight from hitting the bottom of the pond, we can greatly reduce the amount that's growing. Now, during the growing season, once they start to get up into that sunlight area, there's some exceptions to that, but making sure our pond is deep enough is really important. The other really important thing is the nutrient loading. And so phosphates and nitrates are the two biggest components that we have in aquatic systems. A lot of pond systems can exchange nitrogen with the atmosphere. Most of the air that we breathe is nitrogen, right, is what's floating around. And so small wave actions can add nitrogen to these aquatic systems. But phosphorus generally has to come from a different source. So that can be an outside source. It can be fertilizer in household lawns. It can be fertilizer on farm fields. It can be cattle. It can be, plants that have uptaken it, and it's in the leaves that fall into the system. So lots of different ways to get phosphorus into the system, but too much sunlight, too many nutrients. Generally, one of those two things is the root cause of seeing too much vegetation in your pond.
Interesting. So, if we're thinking about a pond having vegetation or too much vegetation out in the middle, and that's because there's too much sunlight getting down to the bottom, how do we make the call about what the appropriate management action is? I think probably digging that pond out is pretty expensive. Right. So how do you decide what's the appropriate thing to do to deal with that overgrowth of vegetation? Do we dig it out? Do we do something else? All those sorts.
It's generally cheaper and better long term to build a new pond than it is to dig it out. Okay. But that's just one part of the decision making, right? That assumes that you have enough space that you can add a second pond, right? That assumes that you don't have sentimental value to that pond, right? A lot of times this was grandpa's pond that you fished in and kids are fishing in. And so it's worth a little bit more to clean it out and dig it out. And so how to make that decision, it's not always easy, right? But there are a lot of factors that go into it. Starting early, doing some management things to make sure that you're extending the life of your pond is definitely something. That's the best case scenario. Keeping livestock out of a pond, for example, can greatly extend the life cycle of a pond.
But that's where my cattle drink.
Yeah.
What do I do there? The whole reason I've got a pond is because I need a place for my cattle to drink.
Sure, and if it's just for the cattle to drink, then that's fine, right? But the pond isn't going to last as long. A lot of research has shown that if you fence off that pond and you pump the water out to them, that those cattle are going to grow faster. They're going to have better daily gains. They're going to produce more milk. So we're going to see calves that do better. And that research is very strong. University of Tennessee has really spearheaded a lot of that research that shows that if you fence it out, you're going to get your money back and more relatively quickly. It's better for the cattle, and it's much better for the pond. We're not adding those nutrients. We're not worrying about erosion bringing in, all the sediment that they can bring in. And so fencing out the livestock is definitely something that I always recommend. There is the upfront cost, something to think about, but a lot of benefits to that as well. Another thing you can think about is digging a water source through your dam. And so then you have heating or cooling. The water going through that earthen system is going to heat it up or cool it down, and that helps you to have water year-round that those cattle want to drink. So it's cooler in the summer, and it's warmer with less ice or no ice, depending on your flow-through and how cold it gets in the winter months. Lots of benefits from those systems. So we got on a little tangent there, but a lot of great benefits to fencing off your livestock ponds for sure.
I'd imagine in that system too, where the water's coming through the dam through some sort of a pipe, maybe with a valve on it, that you would not have to do any pumping because you would have that water pressure from inside the dam moving the water to the tank. Is that right?
Yep, and there are float systems they have. Our group, K-Care at K-State, I think it's turned into the Water Institute now as part of that. They've done a really good job of developing some different systems that the plans are available for out there to kind of come out and show you at a relatively low cost. Getting the pipe through the dam is probably the most expensive part, but that can be done in existing dams. It's easier if we do it when we're building a new dam. But those systems, they flow through. You don't necessarily need a pump. There's generally a valve on the other end, so you don't even need to always worry about the water coming through. Obviously, you want to check it, make sure there's water for your livestock. But the systems really are beneficial if you can bite the bullet and get them established.
That sounds like it. So, all right, going beyond digging out a pond, creating a new pond, and keeping the livestock out of the pond, what do we do when we've got too much vegetation?
Identifying them is the first step. Extension agents are a great resource for that. There's also a great website that Texas A&M has called Aquaplant. And so that is a great resource to go in, and they kind of walk you through identifying the plant that you have. So the first thing would be to identify what you have. And then there's kind of four main treatment types. And so chemical treatment is what I get called most about. What I always recommend starting with is mechanical treatment. So going out there and pulling as much of that vegetation out as you can. And the reason that that's really important is that those nutrients, those plants that we pull out have phosphates and nitrates, and we are removing them from that pond system. Ponds are generally a closed system, and so if we just kill them in the pond, they're going to settle to the bottom, they're going to break down, and they're going to make fantastic fertilizer.
Sure.
And that fertilizer is then going to feed other seeds that we have, and you're going to see that plant growth come back, and you're going to spray it again. And so you need to get as much of that material out as you can. That is very hard work. It's not something that you can go out to a big pond and do in an hour. So it's got to be part of a management plan. Physical treatment is another kind, and so drawing down the pond in the winter, that can expose some seeds and kill the seeds. There can be benefits there if you have the ability to drain your pond. Dredging, we talked about that. Dredging is often the long-term fix to the pond. If you want to keep your pond, it's become too shallow and has too many plants. Dredging is the fix, but depending on where you're at in our state, dredging can cost $20,000. I've seen estimates for a 1-acre pond in the six figures, right, for a 1 acre pond. And a lot of that is trucking cost. If we're going to take all that material out, we need to be able to haul it somewhere that we can dump it. So if you live in a big urban area and we have to haul that load, 50 miles away or something, that adds up very quickly.
Yeah.
So what to do about that? Biological control, adding grass carp, adding tilapia. There are some times that works. Those species each have a detriment to them. Grass carp are picky eaters, so they'll eat a little bit of what they want. Tilapia are the other species that we are commonly recommended to add. And again, both of these, if you're not listening in Kansas, make sure you check your local laws, because it's not legal to stock them everywhere. But tilapia can be added. Tilapia eat filamentous algae. They eat a lot. They don't like cold temperatures. So in our area, you're going to have to go out when the water temperature gets down around 55 or 60 degrees Fahrenheit and get them out of there. And we've talked about, that's not always August 3rd. That might be August 5th when you have baseball event you want to go to, or a football game, or you might have some other plans, right? And you have to get out there and take them out, or those fish are going to die and add to that nutrient problem we've been talking about.
Again, that was Kansas State University Drew Ricketts, Extension Wildlife Specialist, and K-State Fisheries and Aquatic Extension Specialist Joe Gerken with part of their Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode, as they talked about vegetation and pond management. If you're interested in learning more about these topics or listening to the full episode, I will be sure to link their podcast in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We are cutting to a short break now, but we'll have more for you up ahead on this episode of Agriculture Today. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we continue our show with Kelsey Nordyke, Kansas 4-H Specialist. Kelsey, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for having me.
Kelsey, as Kansas State Fair is approaching next week, can you tell me a little bit about some of the ag science projects?
Kansas 4-H is often known for our agriculture projects, and so we're excited about the projects that we have available to our youth. Of course, everyone knows about our livestock projects, but some best-kept secrets would include our agronomy project and veterinary science, which will both be judged the first weekend of State Fair. We also have the horse show, which is the second weekend, and along with those projects, we have some specialized projects within agronomy and veterinary science that I think are important to highlight. Within agronomy, we do have the Kansas 4-H wheat variety displays. This is a unique opportunity where our 4-H members sign up the summer before, so sign up for 2026 has already happened, and those 4-Hers will actually have their own wheat variety trial. These are sometimes run alongside our county wheat plots, but 4-Hers sign up and they get their varieties in September, and then they'll be able to plant those this fall. They'll have the opportunity to work with a producer and or their local agriculture extension agent to learn about the varieties that work or maybe don't work in their particular area of Kansas. Then those 4-Hers are encouraged to develop a wheat variety display to exhibit in their local county fair. And from there, they can bring those on to the Kansas State Fair. And we have some unique sponsorship for those variety displays. The Kansas Crop Improvement Association, the Kansas Wheat Commission, and the Kansas Grain and Feeds Association sponsor specialized awards for our top 5 wheat variety displays. Those 4-Hers will receive a plaque as well as a cash prize. And we have a special awards ceremony for them. With veterinary science, this is a project that is fairly new or has been revived in Kansas 4-H, but we've only offered it at the Kansas State Fair for 2 years now. 4-Hers have the opportunity to learn about animal science and animal health through veterinary medicine, and then they exhibit their knowledge through posters, notebooks, and project displays. Those displays will also be in the 4-H Showcase building.
And I know that there's a few other opportunities that are really awesome for exhibitors to take part in, such as the Champions Livestock Show and the Legislative Showmanship. Can you tell me a little bit more about both of those events?
Yes, those two opportunities are part of the Grand Drive shows, which the Grand Drive shows are for our 4-Hers and FFA members that exhibit in beef, sheep, meat goats, and swine. The Champions Livestock Show is a really unique opportunity where the Kansas State Fair partners with Special Olympics of Kansas. And the 4-Hers who sign up to be a part of that are paired with a Special Olympics athlete, and they have the opportunity to mentor those athletes how to show their animals throughout the day, and then they're judged on those that afternoon in the Prairie Pavilion on the Kansas State Fairgrounds. The other unique opportunity that also happens in conjunction with the Grand Drive is the Legislative Showmanship Contest. 4-Hers and legislators both are invited to sign up to participate in this, and 2 4-Hers are paired with a legislator, hopefully from their area. They have the opportunity to coach that legislator on how to show beef cattle, and then those legislators are judged in the Prairie Pavilion on Saturday afternoon as well. It's a really unique leadership opportunity where 4-Hers get to mentor someone else. When they're meeting with their legislator, we hope that they're sharing about their area. We hope that they're learning about current events and how the legislative process works maybe, and just building those relationships. It's been unique to watch. We have a legislator in particular that comes back every year and requests to be paired with a young person from their area. And so they've had a unique opportunity to really build a relationship over the last several years.
Are there also some competitive judging events during State Fair this year?
Every year, the 2 agriculture-related competitive judging events we have are the Crops ID contest, which will happen Saturday, September 6th in the encampment building. And then we have a poultry judging contest, which happens Saturday, September 13th. Both of these are our state competitions for those 2 areas. And in the poultry competition, they have the opportunity to attend the National Poultry Judging event, which will happen in Louisville, Kentucky in November.
Kelsey, you mentioned that the second weekend there's the horse show. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. The Kansas 4-H Horse Show happens September 11th through the 13th on the south side of the fairgrounds. And this is a unique opportunity where our 4-Hers have the chance to showcase their horsemanship skills. We start on Thursday, September 11th with our showmanship and our halter classes, and we'll move into performance, including our ranch horse classes and our English classes as well. Our kids there have worked really hard all summer to improve their horsemanship skills, and so we're excited to see what they bring to the state fair this year. We do have 104 horse and rider combinations, and so our show is growing, and we really appreciate the support we get from both our sponsors and parents, as well as anyone else who comes to watch the kids' show. We'll wrap up the horse show on Saturday morning with our speed events, which would be barrels, flags, and poles. And those are always really exciting to come and watch.
Kelsey, I know that sometimes getting involved in the larger livestock species can be a little bit intimidating to some folks. So if they're interested, are there small animal projects that they can get involved with?
Yes, rabbits and poultry are good animal science projects to get kids started with, just to kind of dip your toe in the water and figure out if an animal science project is for you or for your family. Those animal science projects really teach a lot of responsibility. They teach kids to be really caring and to develop concern for something other than themselves. And so as a parent, I really encourage people to get started in some of those animal projects as well. But rabbits and poultry are a good way to get kids started. Those are smaller species, and we do have opportunities to view those species at the state fair as well. So be sure to visit the poultry barn. There's both an open class and a 4-H show, and so you'll get to go through there and visit all of the poultry, the pigeons, the chickens, and the turkeys, and sometimes geese that are in there. And then the rabbits are also a good opportunity for 4-H members. We do have both an open and a 4-H rabbit show at the state fair, and there will be rabbits there. There will be 4-H families who are willing to tell you about their projects, and if that's something you're interested in, can help you figure out how to get started with your local program.
I know that sometimes state fair can be a little bit confusing to navigate as well. Can you tell people where they can find these exhibits or projects?
Yes. So on the state fairgrounds, we do have two buildings for 4-H. One is 4-H Centennial Hall, and it's located on the northwest corner of the fairgrounds. And just east of there, we have the 4-H Showcase building. So in the Showcase building are a lot of our natural science projects, including agronomy. We have our wildlife and shooting sports displays, as well as horticulture in that building, and everything else would be in 4-H Centennial Hall. Some of the unique displays to look at sometimes are our geology and entomology boxes, and those will be located in Centennial Hall. Of course, you can always look at the science, technology, and engineering projects that are in Centennial Hall, as well as woodworking and foods and all of the visual arts. But if you want to learn more about 4-H and the 4-H projects at the State Fair, I would encourage you to visit kansas4-h.org, and you can find our link to the Kansas State Fair page for 4-H projects.
I know that when you're at the state fair, too, sometimes you want a sweet treat. Is there anything exciting that 4-H is doing?
Yes, and actually it happens just before the state fair starts. On Thursday, September 4th, we'll be doing our foods judging. And this is where all of our 4-Hers who have been selected with a purple ribbon at the local level get to exhibit a foods product at the state fair. Well, we have to do something with all of those cakes and cookies and pies and all of the delicious goodies. And so we actually have a bake sale as foods are being judged, and when they're finished being judged, they're offered for sale. That sale will actually take place in the encampment building, and that will happen on Thursday afternoon, and it is open to the public. And I do believe you can actually get onto the state fairgrounds that day without an admission ticket and without paying for parking. So that would be a good time to load up on some goodies for your weekend.
Is there anything else that people should keep in mind as we enter state fair season?
I would encourage the public to come and visit the state fair, especially if that's not something that you've had the opportunity to do. Not only will you get to see the culmination of this year's 4-H project work, where our 4-H members who were selected at the local level to go on to the state level get to exhibit, but you also have an opportunity to see lots of things from across the state. There are open class divisions in addition to the 4-H divisions, and so it's always a fun opportunity to go and see what the fair has to offer. The Kansas State Fair has a lot of things that are really cool. One thing in particular that my family liked to go and visit when I was a young person was to see the butter sculpture. Of course, now there is the skylift that goes up above the fairgrounds, and you can look down and see all over the fairgrounds and check those things out. And of course, the State Fair has lots of great entertainment. But the highlight for me is always to visit the 4-H projects.
Kelsey, thank you again for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
Again, that was Kelsey Nordyke, Kansas 4-H specialist, as she discussed what's coming up at the 2025 Kansas State Fair. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll have more for you up ahead.
This is Agriculture Today. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. With forage harvest wrapping up across Kansas, K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk says now's a good time for dairy producers to see what forage they have available and to secure additional forage for the remainder of 2025 into 2026.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning preparing for the upcoming winter season and checking on the forage supplies that you have on your dairy. For many of our dairies, we're finishing up forage harvest for 2025, and we still may have one cutting of alfalfa out there, and in some cases we've got some corn silage to harvest yet, and on other dairies maybe some forage sorghum to be put into the silo yet. But it's probably time to take time and sit down and figure out what you actually have for forage on hand and what you might need to purchase. As we look at forage supplies across the state, and for the most part, we've had fairly timely rains, and in many cases, we actually have better forage supplies than we've had for the last few years. That's a good thing. As we look at the trade out there of the forages, it's really been kind of slow here the last few weeks. Prices have been fairly steady. In general, there's a lot of variability in price. If we look at alfalfa, there's a tremendous range that we can find out there in prices. So doing some hunting for some bargains might be something that you might want to consider. However, I want to caution you that you're purchasing alfalfa that has some tests behind it so that you can determine what quality you're actually purchasing. We've had quite a bit of rain this summer, so some cuttings may have gotten a little bit damp before they actually made it into the hay bales, and in some cases maybe some hay bales got rained on before they actually got put into the barn or into the stacks. So make sure you know what you're buying, and testing is probably the best way to determine that. The other thing that I've noticed lately is we've seen some prices actually include the freight. Many times in more recent years, it's always FOB, but there are some sellers that are including freight in their pricing. So you might want to check that out, as that can change the price on the farm quite a bit. In terms of straw, we seem to have a fairly good supply out there in most cases, and actually prices seem to be a little bit more reasonable this year than what they maybe have been in the past. And in many cases, we have a good supply of warm season grass out there as well. So forage supplies are fairly abundant across the state. We've got a few isolated cases down in the southwest part of the state that we've had some extended drought and maybe a little shorter there, but in general, shouldn't have to travel too far to find adequate supplies of forage for your dairy herd. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to take time and calculate what they have available for forage and what they need, making sure that they go ahead and purchase what is needed to get through to 2026 before it gets too late in the season.
Thanks, Mike. And while we have a moment, USDA's Rod Bain reports on the outlook regarding U.S. milk production, product supply and demand, and prices for 2025-2026.
While domestic milk production is expected up in 2025 and the following year, according to USDA, so is consumer demand, as seen in forecasted exports. World Agricultural Outlook Board Chair Mark Jekanowski.
We still continue to see very strong export competitiveness for U.S. dairy products, a lot of strength in both butter and cheese, so fat basis exports, as well as non-fat dry milk and whey, so supporting those skim solid basis exports.
A slight rise in skim solid imports for both years is also forecasted. Minimal changes were reported in the milk product and class categories for this month. The result, no change in the 2025 all-milk price of $22 per hundredweight, and a 1/4 rise in the 2026 all-milk price forecast to $21.90 per hundredweight. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Thanks, Rod, and that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Chevy Lynn Vasky, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.